The NDIS was designed by Labor to empower people with disabilities to make their own decisions about the care that best supports them and their goals. For that to occur, many things have to go right. Many systems have to be functioning effectively so that the support packages people receive are fair and tailored to their needs. There also has to be effective oversight and safeguards to ensure that when people are not treated fairly, that there is an appeals process that delivers fairness, and I'll speak more about that a bit later. Those protections and safeguards also have to include the providers of care and the staff that they employ. People living with a disability and their families need to know that serious injury, abuse, neglect, unauthorised restraint or, at the very worst, death will not go unnoticed or unpunished. Recent, very public and tragic cases have demonstrated that to date those safeguards simply have not been in place. The death of Anne-Marie Smith, a woman close to my own age living in Adelaide who died of severe septic shock, multiple organ failure, severe pressure sores, malnutrition and issues connected with her cerebral palsy after being stuck in a cane chair for 24 hours a day for more than a year, tell us that something is seriously wrong. Yet her NDIS package included 6 hours of support every day. What the evidence indicates is that she only received 2 hours of care a day and may not have even left her home for years. How this happened without anyone knowing about it or doing something about it beggars belief. This is a woman who was not given a chance to thrive. It's also the nightmare of every parent with an adult child with a disability. I remember back to the years between 2010 and 2013 when discussions I was having about this new NDIS system and how it might work with many people who either had a disability or cared for a child with a disability. And that child might have been an adult. While it was clear that parents with young children were just swamped by the need to provide the best possible early interventions and they faced the relentlessness of caring, there was another group of parents who were worn down not just by years of care but decades. They were ageing parents of an adult child with a disability. Their stories were heartbreaking. A very common scenario was that they'd really felt they had 2 options before the NDIS, and that generally at least one of them had to give up a full-time job to be a full-time carer. This had the effect of drastically reducing their income, which over time pushed them into poverty. Their other option was to relinquish care of an adult child into a group home, which many felt they were just unable to do, or only did so with enormous guilt. So these were very common stories that I heard as the NDIS was being formed. What they all said to me was that they weren't worried about the fact that they were exhausted. That was okay. They very generously provided care for their child. They weren't so worried even about their own health. They recognised that that was a consequence of the load they were carrying, and the last of their concerns was not having a lot of money. But they were worried about what would happen to their son or daughter if they died first. That was the most often spoken phrase to me, that what keeps us awake at night is that who's going to look after this child? And the child may be in their 30s or their 40s or their 50s. And I heard it from parents who were in their 80s or their 60s or their 40s. They could see the future without a scheme like the NDIS. So providing secure residential care, supports with dignity to allow people to live in their own home, the home of their choice, all of those things were an absolutely prime and fundamental objective of the NDIS. But in the way it's been implemented, this system has failed people. It's certainly failed Anne-Marie Smith. And in my mind, that means the minister has failed Anne-Marie Smith. The fact that following the investigations and look into this case that the service provider received a fine of $12,600 after allowing the carer to neglect her so severely tells you that this legislation today is desperately needed. There's also the case of David Harris in Parramatta, who died after his NDIS payments were cut off. That also needs serious investigation to understand the systemic flaws that led to that happening. David was also around my age. He suffered schizophrenia, he was diabetic, incontinent, and he needed regular injections. But he'd missed an annual review meeting, and that meant his funding was simply cut off, and his cleaners and other NDIS-funded support just stopped. It simply stopped, and no one thought, what's the consequence of this for David? Now, this is the stuff of nightmares that families in my electorate are going through now. They're concerned about plans being ended and no plan in place. They do lie awake at night worrying about this. I'm going to talk about some of the things I'm seeing currently in my electorate, but I just also want to point out around the banning orders, when we hear cases like this, it's just staggering that only 13 banning orders have been made in the last 18 months. 1,422 complaints, 13 banning orders. We don't really know the details of the neglect or the abuse or any of the complaints that were made. The lack of transparency there is frightening. The only way schemes like this function are with transparency and accountability. I spoke with an NDIS participant today, and she confirmed with me that she and other friends who have packages have had to make complaints to providers about carers. And you know, she had a circumstance where one provider tried to sell her mother a house that this young woman could live in, when the young woman had already declined that offer. You know, so there are flaws that run through, and if we don't get it right for those serious cases, it just goes all the way through the system. So I'm all for this legislation to support far greater scrutiny and protections, and I would like to see other checks and balances put in place to ensure that there is respect for people, that they have the choice that this scheme's designed to give them, and that they have control. I want to talk about some of the circumstances that we're seeing right now with the NDIS, and I'm going to talk about a couple of screaming flaws that this legislation certainly doesn't go anywhere to address. And it really goes to the fear of the consequence of missing a review or failing in a piece of paperwork that's required. The system is so heavily dependent on forms being filled in and procedures that can seem so opaque to people being followed, reports being made and reports that are missing. I want to give you an example that Sandy has shared with me. Sandy is an incredible advocate for people with disabilities, for carers and for children with disabilities. She has a 9-year-old daughter, Imogen. Imogen has multiple diagnoses, including autism and ADHD, and a very complex mix of things. Imogen communicates using words and picture cards. She's mostly non-verbal, but she has a very fierce routine that she relies upon and that Sandy relies upon. But recently, Sandy talked to me about the fact that their plan was due for renewal, and she was thrilled to be told by the NDIA that she wouldn't require a full review, that she would be able to roll her plan over, that it would just be a phone call, a phone interview and some basic documents that she needed to upload. She was told that this was a formality only and that the plan would be approved in a like-for-like capacity. And then, on the very day that the plan expired, she was told that the NDIA did not think the supports Imogen relied on last year were reasonable or necessary or good value, and that there had to be a behavioural plan in place before any decision could be made. This is on the very day that her plan is about to run out. A mother who has gone through this year after year, for the first time being told that it could roll over. And she knew the progress her daughter was making. And what's more, her doctors knew the progress her daughter was making. It was all documented. And as it turns out, there was a behavioural plan in place, a 49-page document that had been facilitated through Imogen's school. The NDIA were unaware that it even existed, because they had failed to provide funding for it in previous plans. So there you go. That's what a mother is facing. We've been able to ensure that Imogen's plan has been provided for the next 3 months, extended so that further evidence can be given to the NDIA. But to put parents through this sort of agony as their child's plan expires is an absolute disgrace and a fundamental flaw in the way the system is working, or quite frankly, not working. Sandy's case is not the only one. I get these situations happening time after time. And while we welcome the legislation today, what we need to see is a far greater review of how the NDIS is working to ensure that parents are not put through absolute agony time after time, not asked to film their children's behaviour as evidence. When a child is suffering, the last thing a parent needs to be doing is getting the camera out on their phone and filming it. They need to have the freedom to comfort their child. And it's about time the NDIS was designed to support people with disabilities and their carers to be able to do what's right for those people, whether they're young children or old children. So the legislation today is welcome, but it falls well short of what we need to see this government do to bring decency to the treatment of people with disabilities.